Hey everyone, Dan Johnston here. I'm the Jack of all Ministries, and today we're going to take a look at part 2 of my home studio build. So last week I left off. I had just started working on the ceiling and the 3 interior walls because I wanted to get those walls done, leaving the 4th wall, which created a hallway, as unfinished as possible so that I could get drywall and lumber and stuff like that in and out of the room without running into stuff. There's a lot of turns and things like that around, coming down into my basement. So I wanted to keep things as open as possible for as long as I could, which was basically to the drywall finishing point. So last video ended with putting up the framing for those 3 walls. And so today's video is going to start with the next part of the process, and that was actually getting to the electrical. So when it comes to studio electrical, there's a couple of things that you got to consider, right? I was fortunate enough down here to already have not only the breaker box was down here, but I actually had a breaker that was running to just one box on the wall. So fortunately, I was able to tap into that and then run power all around my studio on one 20 amp breaker. So I didn't really have to worry about, thinking about the electrical anymore in that way. All right, so one of the things we have to keep in mind when we're trying to soundproof our studio is we're doing all this work to put, double thick drywall and insulation and sealing all the gaps and all that kind of stuff to soundproof our room. And then we're going to go through and we're going to cut big squares out of the middle of our drywall to put these outlet boxes. And looking at an outlet box, clearly it's not soundproof in and of itself. It's not so much the thickness of the box, although that is a part of it. The issue is how much air can get through here. I mean, these holes that are, cut out to put wires through are letting air right through. And then when you actually put Romex through it, it's even worse. And so what you can do is you can buy these pads. These are putty pads. They're designed for fire blocking, but they actually work great for soundproofing as well because they seal off the box. And basically, this is just a 7x7, about an eighth of an inch thick putty. It's kind of like a thick, silly putty. And what you do is you just put it onto your box, and then you're going to kind of work it around. And this stuff, pretty thick, to work with, kind of a thing. And since I'm going to be moving it around the box, I'm going to go ahead and just cut it in half here. On a smaller box, I would just use the whole thing and cover it. But since this is a, double gang box, kind of got to work it. So I'm going to lay this here. And then I'm going to lay this one across the back like this. And basically I'm just trying to seal off all the air holes in the box and then to get decent coverage. And this stuff is really moldable, so it's not like, if you put it on wrong, you're, hosed forever. You can work it out until it gets where you want it. And then you really got to kind of work it around where the Romex is. And get a good air seal in there. And there we go. I feel like that box has a good seal in it. But for extra measure, I'm going to take my foam gun, and this stuff is fire rated. So wherever there's a little hole for the Romex to come through, I'm just going to squirt a little bit of this stuff in there. And now when I'm done with this, when I cut this box out, once the drywall is installed, I'm going to fill that gap as well to prevent any air from getting in at all. So this is a pretty isolated box, so that's about it. So for the 9th step of the studio build, I went ahead and I did something that I kind of came up with on my own. At the beginning, I mentioned that I did a lot of tests to figure out what soundproofing materials were going to be worth the hype and which ones were not going to be. And one of the things that I tested was some outdoor carpeting. Basically, I just went to Menards and I found this stuff. It was $10 for a sheet of it, so I figured it was so cheap, it's only going to help me. So I went ahead and I bought some, and I hung it first on the inside of the ceiling because I still had to insulate the walls. And so when I put it up there, I kind of had this theory that what it was going to do was, number one, it was going to prevent impact noise, which is basically vibration transferring through structures. So say you're stepping on the ceiling or you're playing something really loud and it vibrates the drywall. Okay, and then that vibrates the studs, and then that vibrates the other side of the drywall or the subfloor or whatever. And so the sound actually transfers through these solid materials that are touching. But if you put soft materials in between as a buffer, it helps to prevent that transfer from happening. And so I figured putting some carpet all around everything would help to prevent the drywall from transferring to the studs or the joists. The other thing is I kind of came up with this theory. I don't know how true it is or not, but I came up with a theory that because I've heard that sound can transfer kind of through the drywall and get into the wall cavity and bounce around and kind of become a resonator, that I thought putting a softer material inside might actually help to prevent that from happening. Now, that's one of the reasons that you put insulation in the wall to prevent sound in the first place, but I thought that having it right up against the drywall might also be helpful. So if you're a sound expert, you can tell me how right or wrong I am about that, but either way, it was only $10 a sheet, so it really didn't cost me a whole lot to do the studio. So the next thing I did was I came down and I went ahead and I finished the insulation on the walls. I went ahead and I used R13 because I had used the safe and sound up in the ceiling because I wanted to do everything I possibly could because that was going to be a big weak, sound point because my wife was going to be on the floor right above me. And also the existing subfloor was there that had nothing to do with my building. I didn't do any soundproofing when I changed the floor up there. So I really wanted to make sure that I did everything I possibly could up there. And I spent, double the cost on getting the safe and sound insulation up there. But in what I read, and even when I tested, I found that these results were true. I found out that R13 actually performs better than the safe and sound a lot of times. So I went ahead and just got the R13 because it was half the price. They said it would do better. And for some reason, it seems like lower R ratings actually perform better in soundproofing than higher R ratings. I'm not sure why that is. It might be the amount of airspace between the fibers or something like that. I really don't know. But I put that in to give me another buffer to go with the concrete walls. So I installed the insulation, and then on top of that, I got the same exact carpet that I put up on the ceiling, and I put that around the walls as well to have that same effect. So I just want to clarify some of the reasons why I decided to do this. Okay, first of all, it's really inexpensive. $10 for a 6x8 sheet is really cheap. It's hardly going to cost me anything to cover the walls. But you might be thinking, well, any money, if it's not going to do anything, isn't going to be worth it. Well, while it's true this isn't going to be as dense as like a mass-loaded vinyl or adding another sheet of drywall or something like that, I do think that there's a bonus here. And number one, how loose this is hanging on the wall. It's not super taut, so it's really, kind of limply hangs there. And if you think about like a guitar string, right? If you tighten it up and you strum it, it's going to make a noise. If you loosen it up so that it's floppy like this, no noise is coming out. So when sound is transferring through hard surfaces, if it's tight, it actually wants to vibrate more. So I think this limpness on the back of the drywall may actually stop the drywall from vibrating. I don't know that, but I'm wondering about it. So the next step is one that I did to again help me out with the ceiling. Impact noise is a big consideration because sound will transfer through solid structures, but it's an even bigger consideration on the ceiling because people walking on the floor above tend to create that impact noise that will travel through into the room. And so I bought this stuff called resilient channel, or res channel for short. And what this is basically it's a U-shaped channel. It's a lightweight metal. You run it across the ceiling joists, and what that does is it prevents impact noise because there's only a small amount of contact, right? If you hang your drywall across a joist, then you're getting the full joist worth of contact. But if you run the resilient channel across it, then you're only having contact points where that channel connects to the joist, so only at the intersections. And so this reduces the amount of impact noise that goes into the room and also out of the room. Now, this particular kind is what they call a hat channel, and the reason why is because of the shape. You can see that it's kind of shaped, almost like a hat, if you will. But this hat channel works great. Now, normally if you're going to use a resilient channel, they sell special clips that you screw in separately, and then it kind of has a rubber thing that holds it up onto the ceiling or whatever. But they're very expensive, and I just wasn't convinced that it was going to be worth it. So when I install this, I'm just going to use regular 1.25 inch wood thread screws, and it's going to go into these holes and hold it up that way. Now you might be thinking, okay, if you're trying to install this stuff to keep a gap between the drywall and the studs, well, isn't connecting it with a screw going to be a problem? Well, yeah, it is going to encourage the transfer of impact sound, but it's still going to be much better because it's only going where it intersects across the joists. And really, it's just going to be at the screw points. But because I have the carpet screwed up there, I think there's enough of a buffer to where it won't be a problem. It was very inexpensive. It was only $6 per piece, and that was in the middle of COVID expenses, so they may even be cheaper now. And it seems like it really worked out well. When you attach the drywall to it, you have to use a screw that is short enough to go into the res channel, but then not go into the joist above. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. But it really seems like it works well, and really the cost is so low, you may as well do it, even if the results aren't, extravagant. So this led me into the next thing I had to do because I was up there and I had built those light boxes that I talked about in the first video. I ran some res channel all the way around the outside of the box and sealed that up with spray foam so that I would have some isolation where the drywall was going to come into contact with that. And so as I did that, I also wired up the light boxes, attached the box in there, and then got the connector to the point where I could hang it down, so when I went to the next step, I'd be able to just drill a hole in the drywall and let the connection hang out. So when I later installed the clouds, I'd be able to just connect the light right up inside the cloud and there'd be no problem, and very, very minimal openings for the sound to get through. Basically, I think I used a 3/8 inch spade bit to get through the drywall, which I then came back and sealed with spray foam. So it's a really tight seal, and there's very little chance for any sound to get through that hole and into the light box. But if it did, then it would be encapsulated in the light box as well. So once I finally got all that stuff done, I was ready to get to the point where I could start making this room look like a room by hanging up some drywall. Now, there are some special considerations I had to do at this point because there are a lot of different steps that make a studio different from just hanging drywall in a regular construction environment. Okay, so the first thing I had to do here is I had to figure out an unloading plan. I live in a house where there's a lot of tight turns and stuff. This is a small room. It's down in the basement. So I had to bring it downstairs, navigate a couple of doorways, get it into this room, and then find a way to maneuver within this tiny little space. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I didn't start framing in that fourth wall until I had the drywall in here. I even brought the drywall for the fourth wall in here before I started framing that fourth wall, so that I wouldn't have to navigate open studs and stuff like that later on. Once I had the drywall in here, I was ready to do the first layer. See, in a studio, you want to have 2 layers of drywall, and you need to make sure that they are offset. You don't want your seams to line up in the same point on both layers because that creates a weak spot. Okay, so the first thing I did was I got my 5/8 inch Type X drywall and I hung it up on the ceiling. Inside the gaps, I didn't mud it like I would normally do, but instead I got some caulking and I filled it that way because this doesn't have to be pretty, it just needs to be sealed up tight. And so I went ahead, I got the first layer of the ceiling done, and then I came down to the walls. And normally when you're drywalling, you start at the ceiling and work yourself down because you want that ceiling to be clean and you're going to have baseboards on the floor. But in this case, I need my finished layer to work that way, so I had to start from the floor and work my way up. I'm using this stuff called Ultra Touch Plus sound control strips. I got it at Menards. I think it was like $6 for a box, and basically it looks like this. There's a bunch of these pre-cut strips. It just looks like carpet padding or like a really thin insulation that's pre-cut, and you attach it right to where the stud is, and then that creates a buffer between the drywall and the stud. Now, you could staple them up or nail them up or something like that, but that kind of defeats the purpose. So I got some of this 3M Super 77, which is just a multi-purpose adhesive that works on paper and fabric. And so I'm going to use that to glue this to the studs, and we'll see how it works out. Now, before I put on the second layer of drywall, I wanted to use some type of a substance that creates kind of a buffer and a barrier in between the layers of drywall. I've done this video before on green glue and carpet glue and whether or not green glue is actually worth the cost. You can check out that video here. But I did that because this green glue stuff is really expensive. It's $16 a tube when you're supposed to use 2 tubes per sheet of drywall. And all the reviews say that the stuff is amazing, blah, blah, blah. And so I went ahead and tested it to see how good it actually was. And it seems like it does yield some results. It's not exactly going to stop low-end frequencies or anything like that, but it does do something. So I decided that I was going to use that, except I didn't want to spend that much money. So I looked at an alternative and tested carpet glue, which you have to get the type of carpet glue that's going to stay soft over time. Some carpet glues will get hard and they'll stop functioning once they are solid. But if they stay soft, they'll create this buffer that I believe just prevents vibration from transferring through, gives you a little bit of a seal, and also probably just a tiny bit of mass for soundproofing. So I used carpet glue on pretty much all my walls, except that I did have that one tube of green glue that I bought just to do the test on it, and I went ahead and emptied that out because I had it. Otherwise, I put carpet glue on the second layer of all the drywall panels before I put them up to give me that sound isolation buffer. Now, I don't know how great it actually worked. According to my test, it did give me a little bit of an extra boost. So I thought it was worth it because carpet glue was only $6 for a tub of it versus $16 for a tube of green glue. So once I had the 3 interior walls already framed up, electrified, insulated, and then covered in drywall, I was ready to start working into the hallway. So the last thing I want to mention in this video is that I also added some exterior blocking. The 4th wall is actually 2 different individually separated frame walls. I didn't want them to touch because that's where you get sound transfer when they're making contact. So today I enlisted my dad's help. He's back here cutting some styrofoam for me. I'm going to fill in the second gap. If you remember at the beginning of the process, I had to fill with a 2x10 all the cavities up above between the joists. On the outside, I put some thick insulation, and then I went around and sealed that up with spray foam. That way it would encapsulate the sound in this area and prevent it from getting over to the hallway. So that's going to do it for part 2 of my studio build. In part 3, we're going to take a look at the 4th wall that I put up, and we're going to see the hallway that created and how we started to make that look nice so we had a passageway for people to travel into our guest bedroom. And with that, I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope that maybe it sparked a few ideas on what you might end up doing in your own home studio. If it did, I'd appreciate if you consider liking and subscribing to this channel, because this is the kind of thing that I like to tackle here. And with that, I hope you have a great day, and we will see you on part 3 of my home studio build.